Hello, welcome to lesson 12 of how to make iPhone apps with no programming experience. In this lesson, we're going to hook up a method to the button so that when the user taps on the button, we can execute some Swift code. And before we jump into our war card game project, I'm going to show you guys a couple different types of methods in the playground first. And then we're going to jump into our war card game Xcode project, and we're going to hook up a method to the button that will fire when the button is tapped. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to open a brand new playground. I'm just going to save it on my desktop there. And I'm just going to declare the person class just so we have something to work with. In this person class, I'm going to declare two properties, and let's just call it age. Let's make it an int. Well, we don't even have to specify that. Let's just call there, and name equals Tom, like that. And then down here, below that class declaration, let us create a new person object and assign it to a variable that we'll call A. So we're going to do that to declare a new person object. Now let's go back into our person class and declare a method. So let's say func update age and name, like that. And we're going to say age equals 20. Maybe this is 5 years later, and the guy changed his name to Ted. All right, so as it stands right now, if I type a.age, I'm just accessing this property of my person object. We can see that it's 15. A.name, and the name is Tom. Okay, and if I call the method now, a.update age and name, it's going to call this method and it's going to set the age and the name to Ted. Okay, now if I do a.age, we can see that it's 20, and a.name is now Ted. But it would be far more useful if this method were to accept some parameters so that I can specify what age I want to set it to and what name I want to set it to. We can do that by adding parameters into these two parentheses. So let me show you how to do that. So let me type in, let's see, updated name. Okay, so let's do updated age first. Okay, so updated age, and this is going to be an integer, and updated name, this is going to be string. Okay, and now Xcode, or rather our playground, is complaining that this line is no longer valid. See, missing argument for parameter updated age. So let us just erase those parentheses, open up a brand new one, and autocomplete should tell you what is missing. So just double click that and we can fill in the age we want. So let's say it's another 5 years, and again he's changed this name to Tim. Okay, so now age should be, oh actually I forgot to update the method. So inside here, age, we're still setting it to this this number here. Instead, we want to set it to updated age, and the name we want to set it to updated name. And now the method updates the age and the name based on what you pass into it, just like we've done here. So when we call the method, we passed in 25 and we passed in Tim. And now if I access those two properties, we can see that it's carried out and updated the age and the name. Now there's another thing that makes functions very useful, and actually methods and function, I'm going to use these two words interchangeably, but the official name really should be function. In some other programming languages, they call them methods. So let's use the word function to describe method and function being the same thing. So let's call it function from now on, just so we use the same terminology and we use the Swift terminology. Okay, so there's another thing that makes functions very useful, and that's that functions can return a value. So Here we've seen that functions can take in values, right? And then it can do something, process some code, and then it can return a computed result as a return value. So let me show you how to declare a function with a return value. So you start declaring it exactly the same way. I'm going to call this method increase age, and I'm going to pass in a number, age to increase. Okay, or how about just, actually let me change that to increase by. Okay, so we'll pass in a number to increase the age by, and we have to specify that this function actually returns a value, and based on what we want to do with this function, it's going to return an integer or a whole number, and I want to return the updated age. Okay, so I'm going to type a hyphen like that, followed by a greater than sign, and the type of the data that gets returned is int. So that's what you want to specify there. And then open up your curly brackets just like you normally would. So in here, I'm going to say age plus equals increase by. And this plus equals, if you haven't seen it before, we'll just add this side to that side. So whatever number I pass in is going to just add it to the age. And then Xcode is going to complain because it expects that this function should return some sort of value that is of type int. So I'm just going to say return the age. So this is going to return the updated age. Okay. Down here, I'm going to call that method and say a.increaseAge, and I'm just going to pass in 10. Now this is going to return the updated age. And you can see here that's 35. Normally, when you call a method that would return some sort of value, you would want to store the value that gets returned. So I'm going to say var b equals this method call or function call, and it would return 35 and assign it to this new variable b. Now there's another type of function that I want to alert you to. So far, we've been calling these functions on these objects, and that sort of syntax goes like this: object, dot, and then a method or a function of that object, right? Well, there are these other functions called class functions or class methods, and instead of calling the function on a object, these class functions are called on the class. They're not associated with any particular object. So let's do an example right now, okay? In the person class, I'm going to create a class function, and you do that by typing class first and then declaring the function as you normally would. So I'm just going to create a function that is not associated with any particular object. So why don't we say that this function would return, let's say, get average age, and it would return a number. And then inside this, I would just return 50 as a quick example. Now, it might not be clear from this example, but the difference between an instance function or just a regular function and a class function is that usually regular functions are doing something with that particular person object in this case, because it's the person class. See, this one updates the age and the name for that person object. This one increases the age of that person object. But class functions usually don't pertain to any particular object, and they're usually used more of a sort of like a utility or a helper function. In UIKit, there are a lot of class functions that we'll be using, and at that point, I'll point them out. You're not going to be declaring a lot of class functions. Normally, we're going to be mostly using instance functions or these regular functions here. Let me show you how you would call a class function. So whereas the normal functions we call on an instance of an object, see a.increaseAge, whereas where a is a person object. Class functions, we simply type in the class name dot, and then you can call the class function like that. As you can see, it doesn't affect any particular person object. Usually you use it to return a quick calculation or to do some quick data conversion that doesn't necessarily have to do with a person object. Don't worry if you don't understand the purpose of class functions right now. I just wanted to point it out to make you aware of it. But as we're coding together and building our apps, I'll point out to where we're using class functions in UIKit. I don't think we're actually going to need to declare any class functions ourselves with our apps. Okay, so now let's jump into our war card game Xcode project and let's connect a function to the button. So here we are in our Xcode project, and I'm in the assistant editor view. On my left hand pane, I have the storyboard, and on my right side, I have the code for the view controller for this view. Now I've hidden a couple of the panes, my navigators. I've hidden the utilities pane like that. And if you forget how you get into this assistant editor view, just click this button here, show the assistant editor. And this button to the left is to go back to the standard editor. Now, one thing you want to make sure of is on this right hand side, if you're having trouble doing any IB outlet connections, or if you're having trouble with what we're about to do, connecting an IB action function, go here, go down to automatic and choose view controller like that, just to make sure that this is the appropriate view controller file for this view. So how are we going to connect a function to this deal button here? Well, there's a very easy way to do that. Similar to how we were able to connect IB outlets by holding down Control on our keyboard, clicking the button, and then dragging this line here like that. Now you want to drag it above this last curly bracket here, because anything outside of that would be outside of the view controller class. We want to make sure it's inside the view controller class, but it's not inside a method. So I don't think, you can't even put it inside of a method. So just put it in between the method, but before the last closing curly bracket. So once you let go, it's going to ask you to create an outlet. Don't do that. We're going to click the drop down and choose action instead. Now the name is going to be the name of the function. We're going to call it deal tapped, and the event we want to change it to, well, by default it should be touch up inside, and that just means that this happens when the user taps on the button and releases his or her finger while still inside of the button. So it detects it as a tap and not a drag or anything else. Leave the other things as is and click connect. So now that creates a deal tapped function for you. Whenever this button is tapped, it's hooked up to this function. Let me show you what you would do if you have trouble doing that control clicking and dragging method. I'm just going to delete this function. Beware though, when you delete that function, if I run it now, it would crash because the button on my storyboard is still connected to that function that doesn't exist anymore. It no longer exists because I deleted it. So right click on the button, go down to touch up inside and click X to break off that connection. What you're going to do as an alternative is just type it out first. IB action. You're going to declare your method as func deal tapped, and then you're going to put in a single argument that is going to represent the sender for the button. Right, so I'm going to put in sender like that, and the sender is actually the button element is going to be sent as the input for this method. So if you needed to get a reference to that button object to do something with it, it's going to be passed in as this parameter right here. So the type of data that this guy is, we know is of type button, so we can specify it like that there. Okay, and now I'm going to open up some curly brackets like that, and inside here we can put some code. But what we have to do is manually hook up this method to the deal button. And how we can do that is right click the deal button, go all the way down to touch up inside, this little circle beside it, and click and just drag that over to either this yellow circle up here or the view controller. When you let go, it's going to show you all of the IB actions that you can hook up this event to. So here, deal tapped with sender, we'll click that, and now it's hooked up like that. So that's an alternative way that you can hook up a function to your button without using the control, click, and drag method. Now I can put any sort of code I want in here. For now, let's just put print deal tapped. We're just going to print a message into our console window down here just to make sure that this method is firing. Okay, so I'm going to press Command R now and run our project so we can test it out. Okay, so clicking the deal button, you can see here down in the console that indeed it's hitting that method because it's printing out deal tapped. Let me show you guys another way that you can find out whether or not it's reaching this point, it's executing this code or reaching this point. So what you can do is click this gutter beside the line of code you want to stop the execution at. So for example, if I do that, this little blue line, this blue marker will stop at this line. So that's called a breakpoint. That means that if I run my app, at any point when it reaches this line, it's going to pause the running of the app just so you can see, and it's going to alert you that it's stopped here. And then at that point, you can check different variables, you can check different things, and this is very useful for debugging your app when you run into issues. So here we're going to use it just to make sure that the app stops or the app comes into this method. Okay, so now let's tap the deal button here, and you can see here that it immediately goes to that line of code, it highlights it in green, and it stopped the execution of the app. Now I have some controls, and we'll go through this more in depth in the debugging lesson, but for now this shows us that execution indeed does reach this method. So what we can do is just click this button to continue the execution like that. And if you wanted to disable the breakpoint, just tap it and it'll be blue like that, or light blue, to indicate that it's inactive and it won't stop execution there. Or you can just click and drag it off the bar and get rid of the breakpoint. So I'm going to stop that there. And that's it for this lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye for now.